The third point that's really key in your option agreement are the rights. Obviously that's kind of the foundation of it. They're going to be really extensive. I'm just going to tell you straight up. Like, they're going to cover pretty much every right that they can for your book. So to make it into a television show, even if it was intended for a television show, the producer would still get the screen rights, the rights to sell it on a whole lot of different platforms, online, on aeroplanes, all that kind of stuff. And the reason that that is important is kind of common sense, I guess, in that if the producer is going to all this effort to raise millions of dollars to make this project, say with Ben, say we hadn't optioned the cinema rights and we'd only got the television rights. And then we've done all this, you know, we've promised our investors all these things. We get this project up and we're going to air in January, but then in December, on December 26th in the Boxing Day cinemas, The Family Law, the feature film, comes out. And suddenly it's a big hit and no one wants to watch our television show. And it sells all around the world and we can't get any interest in our television show because those rights have already gone to someone else. And our investors, whether it's, you know, Screen Australia or Screen Queensland or, you know, other investors, would not give us the money because the risk is too great if we haven't captured all the rights, so that we have the best chance possible of making our money back on that asset. There are a few things though that are called reserved rights that are traditionally held back. One of those, if it's a book, would be the publishing rights. Another one would be the stage rights. Traditionally that you get to keep them, and then the audiobook rights. They're pretty much the three things that you can expect to have in your reserved rights. There's another thing called a holdback period. So there could also be, if you keep the stage rights, it could also be, yes, you've got the stage rights, but you won't produce the stage show for 5 years after, you know, until after the date that we've been on air. And again, for the same reason, just that we need to be able to have our best chance possible of recouping our money. Very important point. What is your credit going to be? So, you know, do you want to be in bold right up the front? You know, I mean, these are some kind of, I guess, traditional different credits that a writer might get. They're created by, based on an original idea by, based on a book by, inspired by. If you're Benjamin Law and you're a very tough negotiator, you end up with this. Yeah, and this. 2 credits. Jeez. In bold. Yeah, but I mean, look, that's an important thing to think about, you know, what is it? And it probably also would really depend on what the relationship has been. Sometimes inspired by is the right credit. That's just what fits. Based on the memoir by Benjamin Law is actually the perfect credit for this, because that's exactly what it is. It's based on the memoir by you. Actually, one interesting thing that is in Ben's option agreement that I think is fun to tell you is that this credit had 2 versions that it could be. If the project ended up being called something different from the Family Law, then we needed to include that word, that in the credit would have had to have read based on the Family Law by Benjamin Law. But because it was called the same as the book, it was fine. That was the negotiation. That's how the credit would read. And number 5, another very important thing. At this point, you need to think about, should this project go all the way, what will your role be? Like, what do you really want to contribute to this project? And that it can be very, very, very different. Ben, for example, is the main writer on the project. There is another writer on the project, and that was important to Ben, but actually that was also important to us. Even though Ben hadn't written for screen before, right from the beginning, we were really clear, weren't we, Tony, that we wanted Ben's voice, that was going to make the best possible show. So to do everything we could to work with him to do that was really important. But with Christos, it's quite different, isn't it? Christos is an associate producer and is a script supervisor, Tony? Script consultant, yeah. So Christos isn't a writer in any way of the works that he has. So again, it's a very personal thing. The only thing I'd say is probably is be realistic, know what your skills are. You know, everyone wants the best possible project, and so you might need to balance your ego with what's best for the project. Like, for example, if you had no directing credits, but you really wanted to direct the piece, and you only were going to go ahead, well, it might mean that the option doesn't get signed. That said, everyone probably knows the story of Sylvester Stallone and Rocky. Do you know that story? He was down and out. He had no money at all. He was absolutely broke, and he'd written this film, Rocky. And someone came to him and said, you know, he was so poor he'd sold his dog, actually, his dog that he really loved. He was really down and out. And someone came to him and said, you know, and this is back some time ago, said something like, I'll give you, I can't remember the exact amount, but something like, I'll give you $70,000 for that film, but you're not going to be in it. And he wrestled with it and thought, what do I do? You know, but, you know, he stuck with his guns. It really, to him, felt like that was going to be the best film possible if he was in that lead role. And he held out. And we all know how that story ended. So, you know, these are things that need to be considered. Of course, another thing that Ben negotiated, being an actor, that's, as you saw in that clip if you were looking closely, the real Law family, that day that they came to set, they actually also were extras in the background of the opening scene of the show. So that's the whole family there, which is something that we really love. So just a few points on how to negotiate an option, and the things that you kind of, you know, just a few pretty high-level thoughts on things to think about. Firstly, be realistic. And I think that's a lot to do with that stuff I was talking about, your role in the show and the money. You know, if you're working with an honest producer, which, you know, hopefully most of you would be, certainly it's the case at Matchbox. We're not in the business of ripping off artists. We want to do the best by artists. We care for artists. We know, you know, writers are central to this business and central to storytelling, but there is a limit to what the project will bear. And, you know, we need to also weigh up the value. You know, it is show business, so there needs to be an equivalent value. So, yeah, just be realistic about what you expect. And I guess that feeds down to the money as well. So, you know, just that key point of knowing that you probably won't make money in the option or won't make a lot, but you get a better return in the if it goes through. I think it's important to know what's really key to you. Like, what are the things? You know, what is your Rocky moment? What's your Stallone moment? What are the things that you actually go, that is actually a deal breaker for me? And what are the things where you go, all right, I'm happy to give up on that one? You know, you need to be clear about that, because at the end of the day, it has to be win-win. It can't just be an agreement where you win everything and the producer wins nothing, because that's, you know, then there's nothing in it, you know, for the producer. And the other key thing, it's really, I guess, you know, this is very much the producer in me talking, is just don't underestimate how much work it takes to get a project up. I mean, you can certainly attest to that, can't you, Ben? Like the hours and hours and hours, and the amount of, you know, money that the producer has to raise, and the sweat and tears. Like, even if you've written the most brilliant book, it still takes an awful lot of work to turn that into a television series or a film. So, you know, it's just good to keep that in mind in terms of the value of the asset. Congratulations, you've signed an option, now what? Oh, no, won't be like that at all. That's a lovely scene from our show where our Benjamin Law, who aspires to be an actor, his best friend starts getting this acting work, and his agent tells him it's because she's got this crazy secret. And he's like, what's the secret? And she says it's because she can cry on cue. So he goes to all kinds of extremes to try and make himself cry on cue so he can have this amazing career as an actor. Anyway. So I guess, look, once you've signed an option, it's a long process. It takes a long time, 5 years in the case of the family law, sometimes shorter. The slap moved pretty quickly, didn't it, Tony?
Yep, Barracuda moved very quickly.
And Barracuda as well moved really quickly, yeah. So, but it can be a long process. The thing that will happen next on the whole is that the producer will start pitching it round and try and find a home for it, hopefully get some development, whether that's, you know, in terms of creating it into a film or television. And from that point, you know, the scripts get written. When you've got your scripts, then, you know, the next step after that is to go into financing. And that's about, you know, writing a budget, going, okay, we've got these scripts, how much, you know, is it really going to take to pull this off? And then working out who you can get that money from, you know, where can you get money? Will Screen Australia give us that? If you've got a network attached, how much you can get from them? Screen New South Wales or Screen Queensland and the producers offset, you know, putting together all the money. Then you go into production and then you're in post-production, and when all that's over, you have a show. But it takes quite a while. What could possibly go wrong? I guess, look, the thing is, an option is no guarantee. It really isn't. It's, you know, it's an amazing possibility, and it's a really exciting possibility, and certainly, you know, a producer goes into an option agreement with real hope that that project is going to get up. But it just doesn't always happen. I guess the worst possible outcome really for a writer would be that you've signed this agreement, you've signed your rights away with a producer who you don't feel is really working to get the project up. And that's tough, I guess, or the project loses heart in it, because it's a legal agreement. You've really got no choice but to kind of sit the agreement out at that point. I guess that's the toughest thing that can happen. What can possibly go right? Well, your show gets made, it's a big hit, and you write a sequel. The end. And then you get a DVD. So that's 101 of options.
No birth is easy. Everyone thinks baby number 3 will be quick because the lady is already stretched out.
This is my mother. For as long as I remember, she has been...
Stab, 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 right into Mommy's Vivi.
Inappropriate.
Ben! Ow! I've got an audition!
Well, I've always liked making people happy.
It's true, every time he gets on stage, people can't stop laughing.
Everyone, I want this floor so clean I can give birth on it again.
Oh, Andrew, I love you.
Is everything okay? With you and Mum?
Just give them space.
You wouldn't know what it's like to slave your guts out for this family. What the hell's a deadbeat?
Why can't you just forgive Dad?
You're a good boy.
Dad, come on, I don't just wake up like this.
Thank goodness someone took the initiative to seek outside help for this family.
Thank you. My name is Benjamin Law, and this is my family.